What's up YouTube, my name's David, and sitting in my lap today is one of, if not the nicest, original paint 1920s Harley Davidson J model rear wheels in the world. This one is from 1924 or 25. Considering the age, it looks absolutely beautiful, but not too long ago, it didn't look so nice. As a matter of fact, it looked like this. When I received this wheel, it was completely mummified in this hard, baked-on grease that had been drying for the past 100 years. It was tricky to get off, but in this video I'm going to show you all the tips, tricks, and secrets as to how I was able to preserve this amazing original rear wheel without damaging the paint, taking it from a dirty, rusty-looking, inconspicuous rim to an absolutely beautiful piece of Harley-Davidson motorcycling history that will hopefully go on a beautiful bike someday. I've got plenty more videos like this coming in the very near future. I have so many filmed that I'm editing right now and many more to film in the meantime. There's your intro. Let's jump over to the shop and get this video started. Let's take a closer look at this beautiful original rear wheel. As you can tell, there's a lot of original paint still on this thing, but as to how much exactly, it was hard to say at this point because it was covered in this old, hard, dried-on grease that's been baking on for the past 100 years. This is not your typical grease that you can wash off with soap and water. This stuff is brutal. It's really rock hard, honestly. Light solvents like mineral spirits did absolutely nothing to it. The only thing that I found that could melt it off was oven cleaner, but that also melts the paint, so I couldn't use that. I had to settle for a much more tedious and time-consuming method to remove this grease, which I will show you in just a moment. Starting somewhere around 1917, Harley-Davidson also painted the rear hubs to match the rims instead of nickel plating like the earlier bikes had. As you can see, this hub still has a ton of original paint on it. Very excited to get it cleaned up to see how nice it really is. Also take a look at the spokes. You might see a little bit of nickel plating shining through. That's some foreshadowing to the future with these as they clean up really nicely towards the end of this video. Now the first thing that we have to do on this rim is work ahead. We have to soak these spokes with some magic sauce called Croil that works amazing as a penetrating fluid. I'm soaking all the spokes. I think I actually ended up soaking them multiple times over the span of about a week to get them broken free. Getting spokes apart on an old rim like this can be a very tricky task to deal with because spokes have a very small diameter and the threads are very long and fine, which is just a lot of surface area for the rust to grab onto. This is why it's very important to use thyme and chemicals like Croil to your advantage. Let them soak for a week or so to get the penetrating fluid all the way down through the spokes to lubricate things from the inside out before trying to break the spokes free. That way you don't end up breaking the spokes themselves. Let's keep going though. In the meantime though, let's tackle this hard baked on grease with one of my favorite and most used tools in the shop, a sharp brand new razor blade. I'm starting off with this method I found that works pretty well for this, scraping the surface a bit with a razor blade and coming along with the cotton swab soaked in mineral spirits to kind of clean things off a bit and check my progress and then continue on. And as you can see, hiding underneath all that dried on grease is an incredible amount of original paint that has been preserved by this grease after all these decades. Now, right away I can tell this project is going to take quite a bit of time. So what I like to do in situations like this is give myself a patch of motivation. What I mean by that is I'll take a little patch of this wheel and take it from beginning to end, make it look perfect in this little patch. Now what that does for me is, one, it shows me how nice this wheel can be in the end, a goal to shoot towards, and also it gives me some motivation. It really looks beautiful in that little area, and I tell myself if I keep going, just keep working at it, the whole thing will look this nice by the very end, and before I know it, I have the whole thing looking perfect. Restoration work isn't always about being so incredibly talented or having the nicest, most expensive tools that money can buy. Oftentimes on longer projects like this, it's about being consistent and persistent, having a goal in mind that you want to achieve, and working little by little every day at a steady, healthy pace until you achieve that goal. Give yourself breaks. Make sure that when you're working on something like this, you're working fresh and not working tired, because if you're working tired, you can actually hate the project pretty quickly. And I think it's important to also enjoy the process and enjoy the work you're doing. Back to this scraping technique that I did to get this grease off of this wheel. It looks kind of aggressive at this 20 times speed, but Really what I'm doing is barely scraping the grease. I'm not really digging in at all. I'm letting the blade do the work using a very shallow angle and letting the sharpness of the blade separate the grease from the paint. The grease, or dirt as I should call it, is kind of like a concretion of dirt that's dried up over the years. It has a very different feel to it than touching the paint. And as you're doing a project like this, you really get the hang of that feel. So it kind of just becomes second nature, knowing when to make the blade not dig so deep and when you're kind of skimming at the perfect level. Also, as you'll notice, these spoke dimples are kind of rounded up like a little hill. You have to be very careful of concave surfaces when you're using a razor blade as opposed to convex, like the smooth curve of the shape of the rim. A convex surface is perfect for a razor blade because you're always touching the highest point and only the highest point. But on a convex surface like the approach of a spoke dimple, it's really easy to dig into the paint. I'd rather leave a little bit of grease in those concave areas rather than chipping out paint. It's a bit of a compromise, but that's what preservation work is all about. Getting things to look as good as possible in original condition without damaging what's still there. Now let's jump back to the spokes and spoke nipples for a minute. These have been soaking for probably about a week at this point in Kroil. They're still tricky to break free, but with this special flat jaw vice grip, I was able to get a good grab on these spoke nipples without damaging them and break them all free. After breaking them all free and turning them back far enough so that the straight slot head on the inside of the bead of the rim is exposed all the way, I then took a power drill and a straight slot or standard head screwdriver bit to get them all off in a quick manner. Definitely something I don't suggest doing unless the spokes are very free, because that could break the spokes off really easily if they're still rusty. So be careful when you're using power tools like that. With the spokes and nipples off, we're now going to clean these up, and since there's no original paint to be careful of, just nickel plating and some original rust underneath, we can use some fun stuff to get it off really easily without having to scrape for hours with a razor blade. Okay, if you're into welding, I'm about to blow your mind with this little tool on my bench called the TIG stick. This is definitely the best tungsten grinder anywhere. It's assembled in the USA, believe it or not. Somehow it's super affordable and it just works so well. Check this out. Just pick whichever angle you want to cut at, tighten this thumb screw, press this button, slide any size tungsten in, let go of the button, and grind away. Ta-da! Perfect tungsten, ready to weld again, and lucky for you, Larson Masterworks has them in stock at the cheapest price available. My chemical of choice for cleaning this sort of thing is oven cleaner. The blue can works great. The yellow can works really great, but it will absolutely melt the inside of your lungs, so I don't recommend the yellow can. The blue can works great. I soaked these for probably 10 to 15 minutes, and then they were ready to be rinsed off and scrubbed off with some hot water and a brush. Check out all that original nickel plating underneath. As you can see, there's also some rust as well accompanying the nickel. I think a little bit too much rust. Some of it has crawled across the surface of the nickel plating. Thankfully, we have some methods to deal with this. One of them is evaporust, this bucket of really mild chemical of some sort that's water soluble and not dangerous. It's awesome stuff. Highly recommend evaporust if you don't have it. After that quick soak in evaporust, we're going to brush these off and wash them off one more time. And as you can see, we have a beautiful original patinaed nickel plating finish left on these spokes. They look awesome. Let's dry them off, towel them off a little bit, and the nipples as well. Then let's set those aside for a bit and get back on the wheel. All right, look at all that real estate, that freedom, that space to move our hands around with the spokes gone. Now we really are in business for cleaning this rim up. Now, as I was scraping the dried dirt and grease off of this wheel, I was noticing something very interesting. This brown film that you see on the surface of the paint in some areas. Take a guess as to what this brown film was. I'm gonna give you like 10 seconds of lo-fi music until I'll tell you the secret, okay? Do you have any guesses as to what this brown film is? Okay, so Back in the day, back in the 1900s, teens, 20s, 30s, when a motorcycle was sold at a dealership, the dealership owner would offer some extra upgrades available to you, and one of those upgrades was a lacquer varnish clear coat over the whole bike on all the pieces. This made the paint shinier, it made the paint last longer, kind of like a clear coat on base coat, clear coat type paint that we use today. Lots of people did this, and it actually worked pretty well at protecting the paint and making it shinier. It wasn't just a gimmick. But over the past 100 years or so, these lacquer varnish clear coats have cured and dried into a brown film. This wheel is no exception. It has probably also been stained a little bit from the dirt dried on top of it, but this film actually looked like rust in some areas because of how brown it really was. But as I scraped through it, I saw the green original paint underneath and realized, oh, this is an old lacquer varnish coating that is just protecting the paint. Now, I've seen some situations where the lacquer varnish is extremely widespread, actually on some parts in future videos that I'm uploading, but on whole bikes as well, and it's not super brown, it's more of kind of like a shellac light tan color. And it does affect the true color of the paint, but in those situations, it's better to leave the varnish alone and leave it on the bike. However, on this wheel, it looked terrible. It just looked brown, so I got rid of as much of it as I could. Finally, after all the scraping is done, I'm ready to buff the wheel with some 3M No. 1 polishing compound. This polishing compound is somewhat like wax in that it leaves a white residue when it dries and all the cracks and crevices if you don't get it all off. Thankfully, it is water-based, so it washes off really easily with a damp rag and some light buffing. Just to be clear though, this polishing compound isn't a wax and it's not a sealer of any sort, and I do recommend using some sort of sealer when you're dealing with an original paint piece like this. I like to use heavyweight brand new motor oil. I think I use 60 weight motor oil. I also think I forgot to film the application of the motor oil on this rim in this video. So basically what I did is I put some motor oil on a rag, I wiped it on the surface, let it soak in a little bit, and then I came along with a dry, fresh rag and buffed the surface until about 95% of the motor oil is completely gone. It just makes the surface look a bit more shiny, it looks more uniform, and it also soaks into the rust and prevents the rust from growing anymore. It's kind of that secret sauce that ties everything together at the very end. Now let's jump over to the hub real quick at the sink. I know I said earlier I can't use oven cleaner on this rim because it melts the paint, which is true, but I attempted to scrape off the dirt and grime on this hub, but it didn't work very well because of the shape, and I just really couldn't get a good angle on anything without damaging the paint. So I thought, I'll use oven cleaner, but I'll only let it sit on for a second or two, just enough to melt the dirt before it melts the paint. It was a very tricky balance, but I think I got a good result with it as I saved the vast majority of the paint and got all the dirt off. As you can see, it turned out pretty good, but the oven cleaner kind of oxidizes the paint a bit. I'm not really sure exactly what happens there. Maybe it's already oxidized. But now I have to come back and buff the paint with this polishing compound, doing the same thing I did with the rim itself, buffing it, wiping it off with a wet rag or a sponge, and then applying some motor oil and rubbing that in to finish it and tie everything together and preserve the surface finish so it doesn't get any rust here. Here is the final result, all oiled up, looking absolutely beautiful. The races are polished a bit on the inside. This thing is ready to go back together. This final step is very tedious. It's actually my least favorite part. It's lacing the rims with the spokes. I pretty much always mess up something and have to go back and move a bunch of spokes around, but I think this one actually went pretty well. Finally, after all that work, this wheel is complete. I'm going to show it to you in a couple different lightings because I think it's really interesting what kind of role the lighting plays on how paint looks, especially old original paint. This is such a beautiful rim, possibly the nicest 20s Harley J model rear wheel in the world. If not, then it's one of the nicest for sure. Usually they have maybe 5 to 10% paint left on them and they're mostly rust. This one has 5 to 10% rust and 95% paint, which is really incredible for being 100 years old. I wish I had the rest of the bike. I don't. I have some projects that could fit it, but it's not correct for those. So I think I'm going to pass it on to somebody else that really needs it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, check out my channel. I have many other time-lapse videos like this, either posted already or in the works, as I do restoration work like this all the time. So thank you for the support, and don't forget to subscribe. As always, thanks for watching.